And joining us now, Lisa Priest, health columnist at the Globe and Mail. Hello there.
Hello.
So you've written a series for the Globe talking about people who are facing the prospect of death and how our healthcare system helps them in that journey. You also did an accompanying video, and I want to show our audience some of that first. So let's take a look at that.
The sickest of the sick come to Sunnybrook Health Sciences Centre, one of Canada's largest critical care units. Each patient is on a mechanical ventilator, and every year, roughly 1,000 people will come here. About 200 of them will die. This is a place where patients, doctors, and families confront some of the most vexing questions in modern medicine.
So it lowers the blood pressure and it lowers the heart rate. So those are signs.
Doctors like Rob Fowler are on the front lines, trying to determine the best course of action to keep patients alive, but also to help prepare families for those whose death is inevitable.
Okay, Lisa, when you decided to undertake this series, what were you hoping to find out?
Well, there have been a few cases that had gone to court where patients and families hadn't really agreed with doctors about end-of-life wishes. And it's one of the conundrums in care right now. We're living longer, medical advances and technology have helped us live longer, yet we're also facing the prospect of how much is too much care and when do you need less aggressive treatment. So what I wanted to see is, instead of the headlines of the court cases, which are very rare, what actually happens in one of these units? How do you decide in the moment what you want to do for your end of your life? So some patients decide themselves, others don't leave any directions, and then families are just left anguished trying to figure it out.
You spent how many weeks in the critical care unit of Sunnybrook?
I spent 2.5 months in the actual unit. It was a 20-bed unit, and then I also spent about 4 months following patients through their journeys as they tried to determine what to do.
So paint me a picture. What's it like in that critical care unit?
It's like, it's more engaging than any medical television drama, I tell you that. It's a very fast-paced environment. People are on the brink, very busy, very noisy, and people, a lot of them sedated, some waking up thinking, where am I? This is the first time they've woken up. And it's a business of life-saving, but it's also the business where some patients are going to die.
Depressing?
No, I find that patients who are facing end-of-life questions, it's some of the truest time in your life when you're actually coming to grips with, what do I want to do? What do I do with my time that's left? What is my legacy? So in many ways, it's very honest time of life.
Would you be okay dying there?
I don't think I'd want to die in a hospital, would not be my first choice. 70% of patients do, but almost that number say they'd rather die at home. So that's one of the things that the healthcare system still has to work on.
Did you change your mind doing this series about that, or find the answer to the question for yourself in doing this series, or is that something you decided before?
I realized being in there and watching people and watching sort of anguished families saying, like, what do we do, that I really need also to think about having an advance directive and not just penning it down and sticking it in a drawer, but thinking about what would I do now if I was in a critical accident or I was critically ill? What would I want for myself? What kind of treatment? And then revising it every few years as you go along, because you know what? I found following these patients, sometimes you change your mind.
It's one of those things that the people that you profile mostly didn't do, and I want to talk about some of those people. So tell me, first of all, about a guy named Rayo who went from a very seemingly healthy life suddenly to a very dire prognosis.
He's a very tragic case. He's a middle-aged guy, life is going pretty well, and then suddenly is struck with paralysis, only to learn that he has a very aggressive, untreatable spinal tumor. So he was faced and then with paralysis, quadriplegia, and then trying to determine, I've only got so much time left, what do I do? I'm 45 years old. And he decided to get married. And he decided to live his life as best as he could, and he's still alive now, but he has done the necessary paperwork about his end-of-life wishes, but he also is living in the moment.
There was a point, though, that he's in the critical care unit where he has to start confronting these issues of what he would like if he were to die. Tell me about the process, the journey he went through in that.
That's some of the most engaging remarks I found, is to actually watch people go through the process. And there was a time where he had to think whether to go to palliative care unit, and if so, then you typically sign a do not resuscitate order. And he went outside with the nurse and with his girlfriend at the time and tried to determine, should I sign this, should I not? I know it's incurable. But just couldn't really resolve himself to it. It was too much too soon, trying to face your own mortality. And in a way, you're trying to order your own death. And many patients are sometimes faced with that very, very odd situation.
And then there's cases, another one that you profile, a guy named Dave Pritchard, who is helping make that decision, not for himself, but for his relative.
Exactly. Dave Pritchard is a United Church minister, and his mother had always known exactly what condition she could live with and what condition she could not. She, in fact, kept an advance directive tucked in her purse for 17 years, which she located in her Brantford apartment after she had had a devastating fall down a series of steps. That was an example where everything went smoothly because she had spoken to him on this piece of paper saying that if I have a severe disability and I'm restricted, then let me go. And so he felt that she was almost talking to him, and he enforced her wishes.
Did he know that she had written this down 17 years earlier?
No, actually a relative had found it while going through her apartment, wondering are there any kind of directions on what to do, because she was facing a very dire outcome, and they need to know how to deal with it.
We don't know why she did it 17 years ago, sat down and wrote this. What made her at that point sit down and write a note for her wishes?
No one knows why she did. She was a very pragmatic lady. She was aware of her own mortality, unlike most of us who tend to deny it, and just very practical and always kept it there for someone to find.
There's also people in that unit, and you profile a woman named Bonnie who has a chronic disease, MS, and then finds herself in a very terrible situation again at Sunnybrook. Take me through her journey of MS and finding herself in that unit.
She was used to run a laboratory, very smart lady, and had a disease, MS, which had basically robbed her of everything but her intelligence. So she was still able to make treatment decisions. She had a bad pneumonia, went to the unit, was on a ventilator, which is a very invasive, pretty awful way to live. And she, couldn't talk, and had decided, if I'm going to be on this forever, I don't think it's for me. Interestingly enough, no one does anything right away. They want you to sit with it. They want you to plan it. They want you to talk to your family. So she sat with it a while, and then a nurse had sort of tracked her down on rounds and said, what would make your life better right now? And it was going outside, seeing her dog, seeing her family. And I was there the day that she went out. And shortly after that, she decided life was worth living. And in fact, there's ways to be on a ventilator at night and not in the day that make it much more livable. And I think she's decided, and is a very good example of, sometimes we adjust to things, and what we think is just impossible to live with, after a while we say it's not so bad.
I remember from covering SARS back in 2003, I think it was, people on ventilators and talking about that experience when they came out the other side and saying how isolating being on a ventilator is. Here we sort of celebrate ventilators as being this apparatus that can keep people living longer. On the other hand, people who have been on ventilators say, at that moment, I would have rather died. Did you find that out in the experience of talking to these people?
Certainly Rayo said if I was on that for another couple of weeks, he thought he would have gone insane. He felt he was imprisoned in his own body and in his own thoughts, and couldn't move or talk. And being unable to communicate like that made it just impossible for him. I think other people, they get so used to, they have a chronic illness that's incrementally just sort of taking a little bit at a time, that they decide, it's bad, but the alternative is worse.
You talked about a nurse in the case of Bonnie, and how Bonnie and her, I think they befriended each other through Bonnie's journey. Talk to me a little bit about the medical staff. We saw one of the video clip there, the doctors, the nurses that are dealing not with their own deaths, but other people's death and dying all the time. How do they do it?
I think there are people who are depleted by being with those kinds of patients, and then there's other people like Rob Feller, as you saw, and this nurse, who are energized by it, who live to save these lives, and when they can't, feel it's their mission to help families and patients navigate death and make for, they're educators in a way, make for the best death possible.
How do they cope, though? Because they have to go home every day to their families and have a really tough job. I mean, how do they sort of get through the day?
I think they learn to compartmentalize a lot, and I think also it really teaches you, and I felt this as well, like that life is so precious. You feel very happy for every minute of every day, really, because you see the untold suffering that can occur to people through no fault of their own.
You follow these people for several weeks. What are the key things that you learned from following them?
I think one of the main things is that it's always important to express your wishes, even if it's over a dinner conversation or on written directions, on what you would want for end of life, because you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. And I think the other main thing is that in the moment, we think we may want something on a piece of paper, but later we find out, you know what, life in any context can be quite good, but you have to really think about it
But
first.
I guess that's the danger, and I would argue that that's maybe why people don't sit down. It's an awkward thing to do and write down, but I guess the question that I would sit with is sort of, what if I change my mind when I'm actually in the thick of it? And so is that the reason why Canadians don't write this stuff down?
It's a good question. I think part of the reason is that people are death denying, and that medical machinery has extended our lives for so long. We just keep reaching for the next thing and hope that the grip of death grabs us and we don't have to think about it. But I think even if you do have an advance directive and you're in the thick of it, at least it gives people a starting point. So, you know, your relatives could say, yeah, she wrote this, but lately she had said X. So it gives them at least a framework. They wouldn't hold them down to the letter on it if you didn't want to communicate that. But it just gives them somewhere to start, because it places a terrible burden on families trying to determine these actions.
And I suppose the other part of it is that, you know, we're told now that we can cure just about everything, that, you know, people with cancer survive. We always hear the tales of survival. We rarely hear the numbers and the stories of the people who are actually dying. Is there a problem with how we're sort of being informed and how we now think of being critically ill and of dying?
I think we've medicalized death and we've denied death, and death, you know, 70% of people die in hospitals. And I think we just keep reaching for the next thing and the next thing and the next thing, and then we run out of luck. But to die this 21st century death with the bleep, bleep, bleep of machines is not the way that most of us, when we really think about it, want to go out.
And not to be crass about it, but this is costing, keeping people alive is costing our healthcare system how much?
It's a good question. I think critical care beds in a lot of places, they refer to them in most hospitals as sort of the equivalent of about $1 million a year. And I don't think it is crass, because a lot of cancer drugs are denied to patients because of the cost and the benefit. And this is one area we don't study. It's not to say that you don't fund something that works, you do, but at the same time, beds that are being used for people who are not benefiting from them can't be used on people who could.
Okay, so then what needs to change in our healthcare system?
I think they really need to cost out and figure out and plan for what's happening in the future, but mostly people need to talk with their family doctors or others about advance directives and to stay on top of it and to really articulate their wishes.
I guess the hope through your series is that Canadians will, you know, talk about this issue, as you said, with their families around the dinner table. But do you really expect that we will change the way we approach this idea of death and dying and making our final wishes known? It's
a tough sell. I mean, who wants to talk over dinner about dying? Exactly. And
yeah.
I bet if you bring it up with your spouse, they'll change the subject in a heartbeat. But I think really it's inevitable. It's going to happen to 100% of us. So if we don't plan for it, someone else is going to do the plan for us.